Detective Sergeant Craig Winterbank and Senior Constable Kim Parnell to do a presentation on cybercrime.
Cool, thank you. No worries, thanks very much. Okay, firstly, thanks very much for the opportunity to talk to you about cybercrime today. It is clearly one of the growth areas of crime in not only the Northern Territory but worldwide, and it's something that we're working very hard to combat, but it's having a significant impact on the community. So if you've got any questions at all during the presentation, feel free to ask myself or Kim and we'll see if we can help. Just as a quick background, I suppose, I joined the police force in 1989, so I've been in the police force for 28 years roughly, a little while now. Mainly worked in the bush communities for a while and then came to town and got into computers, where I've been for the last 10 to 12 years, I suppose. So, yeah. So, cybercrime. We classify cybercrime as any crime that's committed primarily using a computer system or is targeted at a computer system. For today, I'm going to talk about crimes that are committed using a computer system. So this is where someone is online trying to scam you or trying to deceive you out of funds or money, or do things like cyberbullying or things like that. So most cybercrimes that involve a financial loss at some point have an occasion where the person has to deceive you. They've got to trick you into thinking something's the case that isn't. As far as that goes, I think that's the best opportunity for us to intercept these type crimes and reduce the incidence of them. And the best way to achieve that is for people generally across the community to be aware of how these cybercrimes happen. So for that purpose, I'm just going to go through a few different sort of cybercrimes that we see up here a lot and how they work, I suppose. So the ones we're seeing mostly that I think are relevant to here are ransomware, business email compromise scams, which are an issue, romance scams, online sales, and identity fraud. They're all quite serious, and I've chosen these because I think they're most relevant to you guys, I suppose. That's not to take anything away from things like cyberbullying that we're seeing a lot of recently, and obviously has tragic consequences at times, but we'll focus on these ones for now. So, first one we have is ransomware. I don't know if anyone here has had anything to do with ransomware or knows at all what I'm talking about, but essentially ransomware is where someone gains control of the files on your computer system and they lock them and encrypt them, and it prevents you from getting access to it. So you'll go to log onto your computer one day and you'll be faced with a screen that looks something like this. Terrible, you can't really see that, but it's a screen that'll have a time left down here, and it'll tell you that all your files are encrypted and you can't log onto your computer system from that point. They'll have a time and they'll start telling you how they want to receive money from you to unlock your computer. It's quite common. It's something that's increasing in popularity, I suppose, and it's very debilitating to people. Everyone these days has so much of their life on a computer that if they suddenly can't access it, it becomes quite terrible. Unfortunately, they're based generally outside of Australia, so as far as a police response goes, our opportunity to arrest the offenders and things like that is quite limited. But yeah. Generally, we find that these ransomwares follow on from people receiving emails. So you receive an email that looks like this, that claims to be from this example, Australia Post. And it'll have a little icon down here saying, please click this button. So your parcel's arrived. It looks like it's a genuine Australia Post email. Your parcel's arrived. Please click on this button, and in doing so, we'll give you the details of your parcel that's arriving. Once you click on the button, nothing appears to happen, and that's just where it ends. Unfortunately, by clicking on the button, you're enabling the offenders to install software in the background. And that software later on locks your computer. It's as simple as that. So it's a significant issue. My advice with these sort of things is whenever you get an email of any sort, not just Australia Post, we see Telstra, AGL Gas, I'm trying to think of who else it might be, tax ones, any of these sort of emails that you're not expecting to get and they've got a button to click on them. Be really, really wary of clicking on that button. Generally by opening the email you're not doing too much wrong. Do not click on the button is my advice as far as they go. A recent example we had of ransomware, which was quite serious, I suppose. Everyone heard of the WannaCry outbreak last year at all? So the WannaCry was the one that went across Europe and America mainly, and then parts of Australia. It was a very serious infection to people's computers. It targeted businesses mainly, and then stopped their computers from functioning. We had 3 businesses in the territory that were infected. As a result, they suffered about 5 days each business couldn't operate for before they'd recovered. And one of the businesses had several other businesses that relied on their services that also had to close. So the impact was quite significant. It's not quite what I expected to come up, but anyway. The ransomware type infections tend to demand payment in Bitcoin. So I don't know if everyone knows what Bitcoin is, but it's a virtual currency. And the reason they do this is it's almost impossible to trace Bitcoin. We can trace funds as they move through bank accounts and things like that. Bitcoin, unfortunately, we just can't trace. So they'll ask you to go and buy Bitcoin and to pay it up. We've also seen ones where they ask people to buy iTunes cards or gift cards or things like that as an alternative. But generally Bitcoin's the one that they're asking people to buy. So you're getting a lot of Bitcoin demands to pay with Bitcoin? Yep. So that's certainly an issue with it, and it's just something that we see quite common. It makes it very difficult for us as police to track down where the offenders are. Sometimes we can see if they're overseas, but that's about as far as it goes. So. Another typical thing with the ransomware ones is they say they want you to pay immediately. And if you don't pay within 24 hours, the cost goes up. If you don't pay within another 24 hours, the cost goes up some more and whatever else. It's fairly typical, and it's just trying to get you to panic and pay the money before you have an opportunity to seek more advice. We'd always say don't pay the money. If you do pay, firstly, you're funding online criminals, which no one wants to do. And secondly, there's no guarantee that anything's going to happen when you do pay the money. As it turns out, there's no governing of these people or anything like that. Obviously, they're criminals, and there's no guarantee they're going to unlock your computer or anything like that. Best way, or the absolute gold way to avoid ransomware, is to back up your computer and have a backup stored somewhere away from your computer. So back it up, disconnect the backup, do it once every month or once every 2 months, depending on how often you use your computer. If ransomware comes along, worst case scenario, you wipe your computer, reinstall from the backup and you're away. You have no problems. Yeah, backup's great. I don't always back my computer up as well as I should, so I know everyone else won't, but it's the best thing to do if you can.
Right.
Yes?
So if you take everything off the computer, you have to take all your programs and take them off.
So if your computer's infected with ransomware, yes, I'd say you have to wipe everything off. There's no real advantage in just cleaning parts of it because the ransomware infects itself throughout the operating system. So essentially my advice would be if you do get infected with it and you've got a backup, wipe your computer back to absolutely nothing. I'd probably even go and buy a new hard drive if it was me, but yeah.
Right. You said store offline.
Yep.
Quite often you back up to the cloud. So.
Yep. So what you're asking about.
That isn't as safe, or.
No, it can be. So you're asking about backing up offline. Yep. There's 2 ways of doing it, I suppose. One is backing up to the cloud, and that's not a bad option at all. It just, I suppose it comes down to the speed of the internet, how much space you have in the cloud and things like that. The other alternative that I recommend is just buying a external hard drive. Back up to that, but most importantly, disconnect it. One of the businesses that was compromised by the WannaCry had backed up, had done all the right things, but their hard drive was connected by a USB drive, and the infection went straight across and encrypted the USB drive. So, not ideal, but yeah.
So if you computers automatically backing up to advice and to iCloud,
Yep.
it would go straight through to it.
If your computer's backing up to the iCloud, you should be fairly safe, because the clouds are a distinct entity depending on which service you have, I suppose. But they're separated from your computer. They'll have their own protections and things like that. So,
But the one on the desk, it would be infected.
yes.
One in the outside.
Yeah, so if you've got a device, the general way they work is if the computer gets infected, anything that's connected to the computer, the infection will daisy chain its way through all the different things. Every ransomware is different. Every criminal writes their bit of software slightly differently, perhaps, so they won't all do that, but that's generally what we see. So, yeah. Again, don't pay the ransom. And we'd ask that with most of these cyber crimes, you think about reporting it to the authorities. That's either ScamWatch or Acorn are the two that we recommend, and I'll cover Acorn a bit more later. But by reporting them, we become aware of it. We can contact you, we can offer some ideas on how to work through it. With ransomware, admittedly our offers to help you are pretty limited. You're in a bit of bother. But some of the other scams we have later on, we can certainly help. And that's the sort of common theme is, I suppose, protect yourself, be aware of the risks and report it to the authorities if you can. I think we're the only the only state in Australia that tries to contact any victim within 24 to 48 hours. We try. Yeah. So as soon as we receive the report, we'll contact you as a victim and we'll have a chat about how we can help. So, yeah, please do report them.
Do you do that by phone or knock on the door? Or?
We tend to contact our victims by telephone if we can, mainly because there's 3 members of Cybercrime only, and we cover the whole Northern Territory. So we're fairly thin on our resources. So telephone's our normal means of contact. We don't tend to email you because your computer's been compromised and that would be a bad thing. Interestingly enough, the WannaCry outbreak that happened recently, the Australian government, US government and English UK government, I believe, have come out and said that it was actually attributed to actions by North Korea, not a scammer trying to get money back or anything like that. That's interesting for us because it shows that other countries and how sophisticated other countries are getting involved and how sophisticated some of these scams and actions against your computers can be. So it is quite serious and it's something that's growing, I suppose is the easiest way to say. All right, so that's the ransomware scams. Moving on to the next one, which is for people who've got businesses generally, but I think it's a very interesting type of scam. It's called the business email scam or the business email compromise scam. I don't know if anyone's heard of any of them or not, but essentially there's 2 types of them, internal and external. And this is how an internal one works. I'm not sure if you can read that, I'm probably standing in the way. But basically it's an email that appears to come from the CEO of a business and it'll be sent to their financial officer. And it'll be asking them to, in this case, make a payment to another company. So basically it's an email from the boss to the financial officer saying, please pay $30,000 to XYZ Catering. And often they spend quite a bit of time making these up, so they look very, very genuine. And the financial officer will think it's genuine, make the payment, and the money goes to XYZ Catering, who is in fact the scammers. So that's an internal, what we call an internal business email compromise scam. And an external one, which is equally as sneaky, is where a business is sending out invoices asking for you to pay your bill. So maybe a builder who's building a house for you has got to a certain stage, they send out the bill, can you please pay $50,000 for the next stage of building? But before they send their email out, their template is modified by the scammers to have the scammers' payment details on there instead of the businesses. So when you pay your $50,000, you're paying it to the scammers, not to the business. Very nasty, very sneaky way of doing it. We've seen an instance of a local government entity, I won't go any further than that, who received a business email scam like this and were convinced to pay $250,000 to the wrong place. Fortunately, we were able to get that money back and it was recovered, so that was good, but generally that's not the case. So this is a serious issue. Part of the problem with it is the business doesn't get the money either. And in Victoria, we heard reports in the last 12 months, almost 50 businesses have ceased trading because of a business email compromise scam. Their cash flow's been completely negated. They've just gone out of business because they couldn't keep going. So, again, quite a serious issue. Oops. How do I go back? So before I go on to the next one, with these sort of scams, the simple way to defeat these, is, I guess, being aware they can happen, but it's what we call multi-factor authentication, which is a terribly long term. Basically means if you get an email from someone asking you to pay a lot of money, give them a call. Don't just respond to an email and accept that is the right things. There's nothing wrong with just giving them a phone call and saying, hi, I'm about to make the payment. Can I just confirm your account number is 1234 or something like that? Completely defeats them. I will say though, if you're going to do that, don't use the phone number that's on here because they're clever enough that they actually run their own call centres. So you'll ring up a number that it looks like a local number. It's actually got a diversion in process and that goes to wherever the scam is and they'll say, yes, certainly it's a legitimate payment. Please pay the money. So you need to check yourself using an independent phone number. And if it's a builder or something like that, you'll have their phone number. But
Don't you be better just ignoring it?
well, in these cases, they're actually a legitimate request for payment. So, for example, your builder, using the example we're using, yeah, the builder actually does have a payment due, just they've changed the bank account details to the wrong one. So if you don't pay it, I guess you'll have an angry builder, perhaps, or something. So, but yeah, very, very tricky sort of ones to defeat these.
Who is liable when something you pay and you can't afford to pay more? Where's that?
Yeah, so who's liable in a business email compromise scam?
Yeah.
Something that we as police keep well clear of, simply because I think it's every business email compromise scam we've had, both sides have contacted us and said who's liable, who owes the money, and I honestly don't know. I mean, the customers legitimately tried to pay the money to the builder, but the builder, using the builder in this example, the builder's not received anything for his work, so I really don't know. And I shouldn't just aim it at builders either, it's a lot of industries, I'm not picking on builders. So, yeah.
Just in respect to the ransomware,
Yep.
a lot of us these days log on to, say, Medibank, for instance, and you leave the account open because you might want to go back, and there's lots of businesses that we do transactions with. Is it your advice to log off on every occasion, and then when you need to go back in, log in again, and then log off after that transaction?
All right, so I'll just repeat that for the camera roughly. So the question is, should you log off and log on between activity on certain secure websites, I suppose? Is that
just generally?
Yep. So I suppose the best advice is yes. Although if no one else has got access to your computer and it's secure and everything else, there's probably not a huge risk on that. A lot of these sort of scams we're seeing, the offenders have actually had access to the computer for some time, and whilst they may not be actually manipulating the computer, or they do when they change the template, they're certainly watching what the communication that's going on in the business. So with the internal one that we saw where they're faking an email from the CEO to the finance officer, they've watched it for long enough that they've got the correct terminology, the right nicknames, things like that. It sounds very legitimate. You know, hi Mike, how was the fishing on the weekend? Just wondering if you could make this payment or something like that. So they're spending quite a bit of time getting the emails to look as though they're a legitimate email, I suppose. And one of the overriding themes of this, I guess, is when scams and all that came out originally, though, I can remember the Nigerian prince scams. They're trying to send you millions of dollars and whatever else. We could all pick them. They're very easy to determine they're a scam. I mean, a few people still fell victim to them, and I feel very sorry for them, but they were pretty obvious. The modern scams these days aren't obvious at all. They're spending a lot of time making these as sophisticated as they possibly can. So, yeah. All right, so on to our next area of scams, which is the romance scams. This is a particular problem in the Northern Territory, I suppose, although it's probably Australia-wide, but we're seeing plenty of these in the Northern Territory. And one of my personal most disliked scams, I suppose. I dislike all of them, but these are just terrible, I think. So, I'll just quickly go over, I guess, what a romance scam is. If I haven't killed the computer. So a romance scam is basically just an online, people meet online and form a relationship over a period of time, and then eventually the other party starts to ask for money. It's the common theme, I suppose. It takes a few months sometimes, a couple of years even sometimes, but they will eventually start asking for money. And we've seen people in the Territory losing, well, we've seen one as high as about $400,000. But the common loss for a romance scam that gets reported to us is around about the $50,000 to $90,000 generally. So it's a big loss that people are suffering. And not only are they suffering the financial loss, but it's the mental trauma of often, you know, a potentially lonely person who thinks they've met someone who's going to be a new partner, and then to find out that it's all nothing. It's quite harsh. And, yeah, we feel quite sorry for them. So the characteristics of it. The first one that you'll always get with a romance scam is you never actually meet the person. You will generally receive communication by text and email and things like that. You may get telephone calls, and you may even get some audio conversations, but the person will always have a reason why the video doesn't work. They'll be saying, oh, you know, my Skype video isn't working, the camera's broken, whatever it might be, but I can talk to you, but I can't show you pictures. Generally, the relationship will escalate very quickly. So they'll contact the person, or they'll make contact, and sometimes within 2 or 3 weeks, they're asking for assistance or money or things like that. So often the people will say that they intend to travel to or return to Australia, but they're currently overseas, and that's a reason they can't physically meet you. There's the obvious one with the US Army people, where they'll say they're in the Army and they need money to leave the Army or whatever it might be. We've had other ones where they were photographers travelling overseas on assignment and they were returning to Australia in the near future. People going overseas on gem collecting, or all sorts of different reasons. But invariably they always need funds to get back to Australia or something like that. Clearly I'm not very good with my formatting. So as we said, they only communicate through email and Skype. There's no video, and usually any communication by telephone is text only. So they'll request money. When they ask for money, it's not always just a quick, I'm short of cash, I need some money. It'll be things like medical, legal issues, or to enable the import of gems or money or things like that. And they're generally what we see. So one example we saw was a lady who met a man online, and I should say at this point that it's 50-50 across the genders too. We're not seeing mainly women or mainly men who are being targeted. It's pretty well 50-50. So this lady met a man online, and he was going over to Dubai on a trip to collect some gems. When he got there, he'd purchased his gems apparently, and he needed money to pay for the taxes to get them back into Australia. So the ladies ended up paying about $25,000, $30,000 to help him get back to Australia. Then on his way back to Australia, he said he was leaving Dubai to fly back. The next day, the lady got a phone call from someone who was claiming to be a doctor in Singapore and said that the person she knew had fallen ill while transiting Singapore and was now in a diabetic coma in the Singapore hospital and needed funds to sustain his treatment. And because he didn't have insurance that covered him there, they needed another $30,000. And that's how these things sort of progress. They've always got a very compelling reason to need more money. Fortunately, in that instance, the lady was a nurse, and she was able to recognise that the things they were asking for didn't quite match up with the medical treatment, and she recognised the scam. So she lost in the region of $25,000 to $30,000. But that's certainly less than a lot of other people we see.
Before I retired, one of the young girls I was working for, her mother had an online thing.
Yep.
And his story was, I have a business in Singapore and I'd like to buy my, as a bonus to my workers, mobile phones.
Yep.
Do you have a Telstra account where I can purchase things, and he'd send flowers but could you put it on your Telstra account? And he did send money, but it was on her Telstra account, and the bills went up to over $200,000.
Yeah.
So she's left with a bill that's escalating because she can't pay it, and it's in the hands of legal people and God knows what.
We're currently working with a similar one on a much smaller scale, but a person in Palmerston who was befriended by a person online who claimed to be a US Army general, which seems to be a bit of a common theme, but who was in Africa at the time. And this person who was a victim of this scam is not financially well off, so clearly couldn't be a person who could pay a large amount of money for the scammers. So what they've then done is said, we want you to send goods over to us in Ghana for this particular one. So the ladies agreed, thinking that she was helping, because he actually came up with a reason that his children were in Ghana and they needed gifts for their birthdays or something. So she's received these parcels of very high-end computing equipment, and then she's taken them to the post office to send them over to Ghana. We've managed to intercept them at that stage, and we're now tracking back to see who, because this equipment was obviously stolen, and she was being what we call a property mule and sending stolen equipment overseas. So we've located the equipment, and now we're working our way back through the process to see where it's come from, because the people haven't reported it. And it looks like the equipment's actually been purchased in the name of our victim here in Palmerston. So they've created a false identity in her name with the information she's given them, and then they've used that identity to apply for credit cards and whatever, and then use those credit cards to purchase this equipment. So again, you're talking before about who's liable for it. This lady's going to end up with some significant bills from the banks and going to have to work out who's responsible for this expenditure. So it's quite serious how this works, and they're very, very insidious. That they come up with every reason to tug at people's heartstrings for needing more money, and then if it gets to the stage where the people absolutely won't pay more money, they become very vicious, and they'll be nasty, and they'll come up with some terrible reasons. The ones who are threatening to be army generals will often threaten to have the US Marines who are stationed in Darwin come round and bash them, and all these impossible things that aren't going to happen. But if you're a lonely person sitting at home, become quite threatening, and yeah, very serious. Often when the people are asking for payment, they'll ask for payment through things like Western Union, or they'll ask for payment to people with different names who they claim are relatives and things like that. Again, it's just means of getting funds out of Australia and whatever else. And by using payment systems such as Western Union or whatever else, it's much harder for us to trace them. We can see who the money's sent to, but we don't know who actually picks up the funds at the other end and collects them necessarily. So that's why they ask for those payment means.
With the one at Western Union, wasn't there a class action in America about it because it's called wire fraud and they've actually got refunded?
There was. I did a media release on it, but I don't know if anyone listened to. So yes, there certainly was. There was a class action in America against Western Union for their involvement in a particular online scam. Western Union reached a settlement with the American Department of Justice, and as part of that there's an opportunity for worldwide for victims to apply for compensation in regards to that. Western Union agreed to pay a sum, I'm not exactly sure the figure off the top of my head, it's 700 million or something like that. Yep. And that money is being distributed to victims who register for this loss. The important part about that, it's for a particular type of scam that occurred with Western Union, and 700 million, whilst it sounds like a lot of money, I think once it's spread out worldwide, will disappear very quickly. But yes, so.
And there was a cut-off date too.
There was a cut-off date which was initially the early February, I think, or something like that. It may have been extended by a couple of weeks now, but yeah. So, yeah, Western Union, I don't mean to pick on Western Union. There's certainly much more than Western Union. There's MoneyGram and a lot of different ways of transferring funds and Bitcoin and things like that. But Western Union is one that we see fairly commonly. But I think they're trying to improve their processes. Often the offenders will promise to return the funds as soon as they get to Australia as well. So if the people can't afford it, they'll encourage them to take out loans and do things like that to send money to them on the basis, as soon as I'm back in Australia, I'll be able to sell my gems or however it might be, and I'll give you the money back. So yeah. We have had a couple of victims in Darwin who've sold their houses to send the money overseas to fund romance scams. So, and interestingly or concerning to us, one of the problems we have is we find out about these scams and we approach the victims and have a chat to them about, you know, what's happening. Very, very rare that they'll accept our story on the first occasion that we talk to them. They'll listen to us and go, yes, but this person's real. And we have to go back several times to try and just work with these people to show them how this scam's happening. And it's very difficult, so yeah. Often we see the communications at unusual hours of the day, particularly late evening at night, which relates to the different time zones where the offenders are located. So something else we see. One of the things that we try and tell the victims about this is they think they're communicating with a particular individual. So, you know, I'm talking to this person that I've developed a relationship with. What we're trying to say to them is it's not always the case. This is just a picture off the internet, but they're a business operating where basically people are coming to work, looking at their job card or whatever it might be, and today I'm Susie from such and such, and this is who I'm going to pretend to be on my emails. And we found with several of our victims, once they go through the process and have a look at historically the emails they've been getting, they can see where language is changing on different days. There's slightly different language being used. And they start to recognise that, yes, there's obviously different people that I've been talking to each time. So it is a business. And it's organised crime that's targeting them. So yes, we did see one as high as $900,000 in Darwin. So yeah, there have been some big losses. Unfortunately, our ability to recover funds or to seize monies that are travelling around, whilst we do have opportunities while it's within Australia, as soon as that money leaves Australia, our opportunity to recover funds is, let's say, vastly reduced, but it's basically gone, unfortunately. We do see instances where they try and pretend to be more legitimate by giving you an Australian bank account, and that bank account is held by what we call a money mule. So there's a person who's employed or deceived themselves to receive your funds, and then they immediately transfer it overseas. But it looks more legitimate to you because you're sending the money to an Australian bank account. So, All right, so that's sort of romance scams. They're a terrible thing, and we really, we're having quite a bit of an issue with them in the Territory. All right, so, sorry, yeah.
Last month, I've just been inundated with all these romance, male liberator, and all these dreadful Russian girls available.
Yep.
Do I report that to someone?
You can report those things. There's probably not a lot we can do about it, to be honest. As much as I'd like to say we can control who sends emails and that, we can't. I found, personally, I registered on a online photography forum a few months ago that was located in overseas somewhere. And for several months after that, I just got inundated with emails. So you don't, it could be quite a legitimate website that they've managed to get your details from, but yeah, it's not ideal, for sure. And
It ends up in your trash folder anyway.
hopefully it does end up in your trash folder. But I'd certainly say don't reply, even if they have an unsubscribe thing on them or something like that. If they're genuine scam emails, if you click unsubscribe, it's just validating to them that you actually exist. So, yeah.
How do they get into your computer to do all this? Or is it just, they just send emails?
That's one of the ways, is by sending emails and people clicking on it. But the romance scams, for example, they're just posing as people and waiting and trying to meet you online everywhere. So different. Yeah, they're not actually. So no, yeah. So with the romance scams, they're not actually compromising your computer. No. I'll quickly play on. Online sales. This is a issue we're having, and we call these puppy scams. Terrible little thing, lovely little puppies. These are quite common up here, and the offenders tend to claim that they're from the Northern Territory. And we think that's because they're advertising these puppies Australia-wide, and if they claim to be from the Northern Territory, it's much less likely that someone from Melbourne or something like that is going to travel up here to have a look at the puppies before they buy them. They're just going to accept that they exist and purchase the puppies. So the losses we're seeing with these sort of scams aren't necessarily as high individually. General loss of people with puppy scams is up to about $10,000 we're seeing generally. So it's not as high as the romance scams, but the volume of these is significant. So we're seeing lots of them.
So people come across those sites just when they Google to buy a dog?
Yep.
Or is this via unsolicited emails or?
Both, but generally when they've gone to a site looking to buy a puppy, they'll see an ad like this and go, oh, they're just fantastic and I want to buy these puppies. And again, the scam gets very nasty very quickly. So on this particular scam, we see a lot of people buy their puppy, they pay their $2,000 for their puppies, and the puppies don't turn up. So obviously they back on the email and complain, and where's my puppies? The scammers then will commonly say something along the lines of, we sent the puppies from the Northern Territory, they're now in, pick a location, maybe Alice Springs. It's a terribly hot day in Alice Springs today, and they will do that research to confirm the weather. It's a terribly hot day in Alice Springs today. The puppies are sitting on the tarmac waiting for clearance. If you don't pay another $5,000 for an insulated cage, the puppies will die. And they're working like that. Now, we've commonly seen people who've said to us, we were 99% sure it was a scam, but we paid the extra $5,000 because we just couldn't bear to think that we were responsible for the death of the puppies or something like that. So, yeah, a terrible thing to, again, nasty thing to happen, and we see a lot of them. So.
Sometimes the sites are legit, but they will take requests from other breeders, and they're the ones that can be the scammers. So the site will advertise other puppies for sale, and then you will then contact the actual breeder, and it's pending the breeder. So it's not necessarily just the actual site that you're moving is corrupt. It's the person actually selling the puppies on that site.
Yeah. So one of the ways we recommend you can avoid these sort of scams, or one way you can do some searches for it, and it's not foolproof, so don't, by any means it's not foolproof, but have you ever heard of reverse image searches? So we've all heard of using Google to do a search, which is searching by text, but you can search by image. So if you copy this image to Google, and if you go into images on Google, when you do a search on there for images, you can see a little camera on the next to the search bar. If you upload that image to the camera, it'll tell you if it's seen it anywhere else on the internet. And it's one way that you can, if you do this particular image of the puppies, you'll find incidents of those same puppies for sale in South Africa, Malaysia, Italy, and all sorts of places. So it just shows how worldwide the scam is. But yeah, so. Anyway. They're another one that use money mules a lot to convince you to pay. Obviously, if you had this scam and they said, please send the money for the puppies to China or something, you're probably not going to do it. But if you get an Australian account saying send the money to whatever, you probably would do it. So they use money mules to accept the money and then bounce it outside of Australia. So. And we often see online scams too, where they'll overpay. So if you're selling something, you may be selling a car online, and this scam works. They'll say, I want to buy you a car that's for sale for $10,000, but I want to pay $12,000 for it, and I want you to pay $2,000 to the transport company to get it sent to me in Queensland or wherever I might be. And invariably, they'll send you proof of their payment, maybe through PayPal or something like that, which is faked. You'll think that you've received $10,000, but it hasn't actually landed in your account yet. Pay the $2,000 to the fake transport company, which is to the scammer, and then you never actually receive the $10,000 and you're out of pocket $2,000. Fairly simple, fairly common scam, but it's the overpay scam that we see a bit of too. So. With any of these things, I suppose it's just a matter of, to avoid them, it's, again, the multi-factor confirmation. Give the people a call, ask them some questions, do some independent research about if they've sold other puppies, these sort of things. And it's just arming yourself with a bit of knowledge to prevent these sort of scams happening.
When you're making a payment too, try and use a secure payment like a PayPal. Quite often people lose money because initially it's a PayPal, and then you'll contact the person selling or buying, and they'll say, oh, do you mind putting it in my bank account instead? And so you go outside the secure payment where you've got insurance through PayPal, and you'll just pay from an account, and once the money's gone, it's gone. You don't get it back.
Yeah.
So stick to a secure PayPal if you are paying on Country or one of those sort of things.
I'm not sure if you're all aware of it or not, but at the moment, if you do a transfer through a bank transfer, it takes 24 to 48 hours to clear through normally. The instant payment method, I can't think of the right word for it.
UPL.
There you go, is coming in shortly. And that'll basically be, sorry? Is it? Oh, very shortly, there you go.
What's it called? New payment? Some payment line or something, UPL.
Yep.
And it will take seconds to transfer money.
So effectively that's it. Instead of being 2 days where it gives us a bit of an opportunity to get in and do something, within seconds it'll go from one account to another. And that means the money mules, they can effectively have 2 or 3 or 4 bounces of this money, which makes it impossible for us to trace it in no time at all. And then the money leaves Australia. So yeah, it's something that we think, well, historically when it came in the United Kingdom, fraud went through the roof for a short time. And there's certainly a risk of this being a real issue in Australia when it first happens. So. It's being introduced by the Reserve Bank. And it has a lot of benefits for the community in that, as I understand the concept of it, the faster money moves around the community, the faster it can be taxed, I suppose. So if I send you money and then you spend it within an hour, obviously you're paying GST on it, and if those people spend it again within an hour, the GST and things like that's happening much more quickly. And there's opportunity for people to make profits and whatever else. It isn't just tax, I'm sure. Maybe.
They say consumers demand that they can do fast transactions.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't be so harsh to the tax office, but
There's advantages to the banks too.
yes. But it's certainly going to be a challenge for us when it first starts and first happens.
Bring back checks.
Yes, bring back checks. Last one I think I'll talk about is identity fraud. This is very serious in that it disempowers the victim. So essentially you've got someone else who's using your identity, and using that identity they're creating loans or financial obligations that you, as far as the other businesses are concerned, you're responsible for. And it's very, very hard to prove that you're not someone using your name and everything else, especially if they do it very well. So identity fraud at the moment isn't super common, but it's very, very debilitating to the victims. We had a recent instance in the Northern Territory that you might have saw where we prosecuted a person who sent out a email pretending to be the motor vehicle registry, and they were asking people to submit replies as a survey. But in that submission of a reply, it asked for your, amongst other information, for your name, date of birth, address, car rego, mobile phone number, and other information. And of course, the potential is for a person, if they have this information, to then start doing things on your behalf, claiming to be you. So, something we see a fair bit of. I'm going backwards. It's all right. So as far as our response to identity fraud is a company called ID Care. It's a semi-government agency based in Australia, and they've been charged with responsibility of helping people who suffer identity fraud. They're exceptionally good, and anyone that we receive a complaint from that is anything to do with identity fraud, we'll offer to make a referral to ID Care. Having said that, there's nothing stopping anyone themselves contacting ID Care. They've got psychiatrists or psychologists, or whichever one they are. They've got professionals there to help. They've got ways to empower yourself to recover your identity, to do all sorts of things. So if you ever think you're suffering some sort of identity loss, report it to us at the police, we'd ask. But by all means, look at this Identity Care people. They are exceptional people. So.
I mean, even if you haven't really had a problem, but you think that there may be a problem, it wasn't a computer, it was post, and my new bank account went missing.
Yep, and that's a...
And I rang the police and I rang the credit card, but nobody was interested.
Yep. So that's something we do see a bit of. Yeah. So just to reiterate for that, so the story is that you're supposed to receive your bank account or your credit card or something like that through the mail, and it doesn't arrive. We do see this happening, and people are using that information, maybe the credit card or whatever else, to commit identity fraud on some sort of level. Our advice would be, obviously, contact your financial institution in the first instance. They're the ones who can cancel that card and give you another one or whatever else, and minimise the ongoing harm.
Yeah.
But people like this are terribly useful, and there's nothing stopping you either going to the website and having a look or giving them a call. They are very, very good. And yeah, I've not heard a bad word about ID Care, so I'd certainly encourage it, if you've got any issues at all, to contact them. So protecting yourself against all these sort of scams we're talking about, there's websites like ID Care, websites like ACORN, which is the Australian Cybercrime Online Reporting Network, and ScamWatch. And not only does ACORN let you report cybercrime, and that's how we get our jobs, but it also has got guides on there on how to protect yourself, how to minimise the harm, make yourself a harder target, and things like that. So I'd recommend, if you've ever got a moment, to sit down and just go through some of these sites and see some of the suggestions they have. As far as ACORN goes, it's a national group, and it's run by the Australian Criminal Intelligence Service, and they receive all the jobs through ACORN and then they farm them out to the individual police. So this is how my office receives 95% of our jobs through ACORN. And yeah, the idea behind it is if you've suffered a cybercrime, it means you're probably on a computer. You don't have to go into a police station to report or anything like that. You can just log online and put your details in. Another one that the Commonwealth Government offer is Stay Smart Online. Again, there's lots of advice on there. You can't report things, but they've certainly got lots of advice on what you can do to look after yourself. The ATO scams that we saw, they had their own line as well. And I suppose, I'm actually not sure what I meant by this post, but anyway, I think what I was trying to say is, with all these different social medias and ways you can communicate these days, you just need to be willing to arm yourself and educate yourself on how to be safe when you're doing it. There's no one or two things I can say that's going to make you 100% safe when you use any of these bits of software, but it's up to you to sort of arm yourself and have a look around and make sure you know what's going on. I can certainly tell you some very interesting stories about a couple of these and how they work in a sec if anyone's interested. It's fascinating, I think. So again, be careful when you're shopping online. Protect your personal information. If you notice things are going missing, tell people about it. Yeah. And never ever, if you're in a romance scam or if something we have seen, if people are offering to sell you stuff or whatever else, don't send them a copy of your driver's licence or stuff like that online to validate your ID. We've got several people in Darwin whose identities are being used in scams all the time. And they're copying online abuse regularly because people think they're the ones doing the scamming, whereas the true reality is they've just had their identity stolen.
So when you go into your car rego and they ask for an ID or something.
Oh, they're not too bad. The car regos aren't too bad.
That's the thing though, knowing which is legitimate.
Which is legitimate, yeah. So I suppose with that thing, it's a matter of not following a link on an email so much, but validating that the website you're at is the right website. So don't always believe what sort of appears in front of you. Multi-factor authentication, like we said, maybe give them a call to have a chat. The old-fashioned way, even go and see the people and talk to them. Bit of a radical thing to do these days, but yeah. And again, the last one, don't open suspicious emails or links, and tell us. We're happy to help. We really want to help people, but yeah, tell us what's going on.
Craig, if I just updated my internet security or something today on my computer, I mean, is that a useful thing to do? I mean, is it a good thing to do? Cost me money.
Oh, certainly updating, having good security on your computer, which is the question, yes, absolutely. If you don't have good antivirus protection and things like that, then you're certainly raising your profile, your risk of being targeted, yes.
You go to Dropbox. Yeah.
Dropbox, yes.
Because I saw it today and I had this trend, my trend came up saying, do I allow this? And it came up twice and said things like that. So they have both securities through that side.
Yep. So, yeah, I suppose with any of these things, it's a matter of, I can't tell you exactly which bit of software is good and bad all around the place. As far as Dropbox goes, there's certainly a legitimate program called Dropbox and it works very, very effectively. But you've got to be careful that the link that you're installing your Dropbox from or wherever it might be is a legitimate link. And if you're installing it from somewhere that's not legitimate, that might be installing software that looks like it's Dropbox, but is in fact doing terrible things to your computer. So it's a matter of you being confident that what you're doing is the right thing. Pretty well that's the end of my presentation today. So thank you as far as that goes, and I'll turn off this in a second, and if you've got any questions, I'm happy to go through anything like that. So cool. Cool, thank you.